Allison Seeley-Smith here, the voice of Storm from X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men 97. I'm summoning you to a monumental gathering, the Uncanny Experience, the immersive X-Men fandom convention. This September 28th and 29th, we are transforming the Minneapolis Club in Minnesota into the hallowed halls of the Xavier Institute. Prepare for an electrifying array of panels, a mutant marketplace, celebrity meet and greets, a cosplay contest, the enigmatic Hellfire Club, and an unforgettable after-party in the mansion. Embrace your powers and let the storm guide you. Visit theuncannyexperience.com to learn more.
Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da 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 You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
And I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. And in this episode, we're prowling the dystopian present looking for our missing body parts in our creator corner. We're being Mangasplained by Deb Aoki and Christopher Woodrow-Butcher, talking about Search and Destroy from Fantagraphics and Mangasplaining Extras.
We're actually recording this episode a week from when you are hearing this. We recorded this episode and last week's episode back to back because we're getting ready to go to the Outer Banks for a family vacation. 16 people under one roof. Will we survive? I hope so. At the very least, we recorded this episode.
Yes, it is my family. It's my parents, my siblings, all of their spouses, all of their kids, and for Brad and I, child-free, it can feel a lot. It can feel a lot, and we're all texting each other, all trying to make plans to make sure that everybody has a good time, because you have to have a good time.
We're going to have a good time.
A good time must be had.
Like, you know, the plan is to just relax. That's the thing about going to the beach. And the way that we relax is we bring a ton of comics with us.
Oh, yeah. And the way that we don't relax is being on a text chain.
Well, that's true.
That is stressful.
But we're also doing this vacation days before leaving for San Diego Comic-Con. So that means, like, today, as we're recording this, which is, again, a week ago from when you're listening to this, Lisa and I have to do so much. We have to record and edit multiple podcasts, 3 actually. We have to get this apartment cleaned because maintenance is going to be visiting our apartment when we are away, and we don't want them to see what we have done to this place.
The monsters that we truly are.
So we're like scrubbing our bathroom, we're doing all our laundry, we're cleaning the kitchen, we're packing, and so yeah, we're at high stress, but. Yeah. I know that it's all ultimately going to be worth it. And I am excited, you know, having just recorded our last week's episode with Maurice Vellicoupe. That conversation, again, was so special. And if you haven't listened to that episode, please do yourself a favor and go listen to Maurice Vellicoupe. He is one of the giants in cartooning right now, and we're honored to have him on the podcast. And then in this episode, to have Deb Aoki and Christopher Woodrow-Butcher on the podcast. I mean, these are some podcast greats.
Yeah, and this is a conversation unlike we've ever had before. Yeah. They have taken their podcast adventures in such an intriguing turn, and I'm so excited that we get to discuss it with them on this podcast.
And by intriguing turn, you mean we're absolutely jealous of where they are right now.
100%.
Yeah, I do think we have our jealousy under control a little bit.
I hope so.
And what we actually come away from this conversation with is a lot of inspiration. And the inspiration that we got from them and what we got from Maurice Vellicoupe, it's perfectly propelling us to San Diego Comic-Con.
And that inspiration is just fuel in our tank to remind us, like, what Comic-Con and what going to conventions and what being part of this greater comic book community is all about. And you guys know I run anxiety hot. Like, whenever I am approaching anything, it can be a fun thing, like going to the beach with my family. It can be, you know, a really, you know, a hotly anticipated thing that we do every year, like San Diego Comic-Con. But I always have, a piece of me is always digging her heels in a little bit.
A piece of you is always worried, is always anxious about the thing.
Actively concerned.
Whether you're excited about it or not.
Right. And I feel like this is our second year going to San Diego Comic-Con as press. And it was like our first time, or it's like our second time going to San Diego Comic-Con as attendees. Like, where we dipped our toe our first year, and then by our second year, we're like, okay, we can begin to figure out how these pieces all, moving pieces all fit together.
So in 2011, when we first went, it was like, you know, madness. Overwhelming, total madness. And then in 2012, we were like, oh, I think we know what to expect now.
We at least had a strategy.
Right. And so it feels like we're back at 2012 again.
Right. Where it's like we know just enough about doing press at San Diego Comic-Con to be a little bit dangerous. You know what I mean? And a lot of the actual scheduling stuff, you know, that's a lot of that is done by Brad. And I love him for doing it because I could not handle it. It's so many emails. I hate outstanding communique.
Yeah, there's a lot there right now.
But like he keeps popping his little head in, going like, oh, we've had this on Thursday and this on Friday, and don't forget this, we have to prepare this on Tuesday. And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, we're doing it all now so that when we're at the beach, which is, again, hopefully right now as you're listening to this, we can sit in the sand, look at the ocean, and just sort of relax, read some comic books. Your comment, though, about how you approach everything with some level of anxiety reminded me about our article that's on the site right now, which is like 46 tips and tricks to survive San Diego Comic-Con. We reached out to a bunch of really cool people, publicists, journalists, artists, writers, and they all gave their tips. And, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, talk to the people in line, make new friends, and that's Brad.
Yeah.
But then you have somebody like Jadzia Axelrod, the writer behind Galaxy, The Prettiest Star, and Hawk Girl, Once Upon a Galaxy. You know, she has a great comment where she says, remember that the door swings both ways.
Yeah.
You can escape at any time, and maybe you should plan some time to escape, to step away. It's all right to find some downtime away from the madness of the convention. And I don't necessarily relate to that as an extreme extrovert who just wants to be running around constantly and seeing everything that he possibly can, even though there's no way that I can possibly see everything. And you, though, are the introvert.
Yeah.
You're like Jadzia Axelrod.
Right. Where, like, I'm a person who loves to leave. You know what I mean? Like, even if I'm having the most fun I've ever had, probably 25% of me is really looking forward to going.
Right. And I think it's important to get a tip like that from Jadzia because we need permission to leave events like this.
We need permission to introvert sometimes.
Con culture so often is about like, you gotta go. If you're not going, you're missing out. And the reality is it's okay to miss out because you're gonna miss out. There's no way to see everything again, you know?
Yeah, and you're not gonna enjoy it if you are completely burned out and hysterical.
And David Harper of Sketched and Off Panel also echoed those sentiments as well. You know, he's somebody who's been going to conventions for a very long time and has learned that, you need to recharge and step away.
And I have found that a great way to kind of isolate and recharge is to wear an enormous pair of headphones and pull a book out of your bag.
Right.
People at Comic-Con respect a reader's space. And perhaps you want a few hot manga recommendations, and I can tell you who to go to. It is Deb Aoki and Christopher Woodrow-Butcher from Mangasplaining.
If folks don't know what Mangasplaining is, they should go to the links in the show notes. There's a bunch of them. Start clicking and clacking and finding your way over to their incredible website. Mangasplaining started as a podcast between Deb Aoki, Christopher Woodrow-Butcher, David Brothersand, and Chip Zdarsky. And you're going to hear the origin of it in this conversation. Right. I don't want to spoil it.
But I love the idea that it is meant to be an open invitation for non-manga readers to start reading manga. I think that is so cool.
And then they took their platform and they evolved it. They started their Substack and they started publishing comics on there. And now they've taken their comics from their Substack and they've partnered with publishers like Fantagraphics and are putting out comics like Okinawa and Search and Destroy.
This goes back to our conversation with Tyler Crook and Lonesome Hunters. They have pierced the veil, right? When you are in this comics world enough, you all of a sudden want to become part of the magic, and they are really doing it. And it feels so cool to hold a physical copy from Fantagraphics, who puts out an amazing product, and open it up and see that it came from podcasters. I don't know, it just fills me with pride.
Yeah, absolutely. Okinawa was such a unique story and it made for a brilliant artifact. It felt good in the hands.
Totally spoonable book.
And the same goes for Search and Destroy, which comes from artist Atsushi Kaneko. It's this beautiful digest, but it is a hefty digest. Mm-hmm. There's some serious weight to it. The paper quality is phenomenal. Again, Fantagraphics, they know how to put a book together. And the story itself is fascinating. And I don't just mean the plot, although it is that also. I mean the story of how it came into being. It is an adaptation of an iconic work. It's an adaptation of Dororo from Osamu Tezuka, right? The god of manga. It's a little bit like going, well, why not adapt Casablanca or The Godfather?
Or Psycho.
or Psycho. And as somebody who likes the Psycho remake...
We're apologists.
There are articles out there where I defend Gus Van Sant's work. I'm always excited about adaptations. And I'm excited by somebody who is bold enough to adapt Dororo, but do it in such a different way. To take that story of a Ronin who had his body parts dispersed by the gods and then make it a cyberpunk future sci-fi tale. So good.
And it's exciting to see them take the manga-splaining ethos of manga is for everyone and putting that energy into a small press, going like, what is a piece of manga? What is a work of manga that anyone could pick up, any sci-fi fan could pick up and really get so much out of?
Yeah, and let's be real, let's be honest. We're not the biggest manga fans on the planet. We're actually pretty new to manga. We have read Tezuka, but we've only started reading Tezuka in 2020, right? Like so many people, we discovered manga during the pandemic.
And we've talked at length about like how it's hard to start new journeys when you're an adult.
Yeah.
You know, we get in our groove sometimes and we know like, okay, we can walk to the comic section and know exactly what our taste is and go directly to the creators that we love. And it can feel really vulnerable walking into another section of Barnes & Noble and picking up a book for the first time.
Yeah. But also, it can be incredibly rewarding.
And why not have a childlike sense of wonder?
There you go.
How does that go out of style?
So, Lisa, I want to talk about how you responded to Search and Destroy. I read it first. I really liked it. And I was like, I wonder if Lisa's going to like this. I wasn't entirely sure. And then you read it while I was on the couch in the other room, and then you came out and you're like, Brad, I
freaking love this book.
Right.
Yeah, well, I understand why you'd think that I would not like it, because it is action. But I was practicing the thing of like, when I am my worst self, I forget to look at the pictures of a comic, and I'll look at all of the words, and I'll finish the book, and I'll go like, I don't get it. You know what I mean? It's because you didn't look at the pictures. So I was doing the thing where I really looked at a panel until I could articulate to myself exactly what was going on. Mm-hmm. So I was really trying to practice being a good reader, but also I loved the idea of it. And we're going to talk about it a little bit in the interview, but what the story is about is there is this woman, and she is full of rage because in a time before this first volume, pieces of her were stolen and sold to 48 creatures.
Creatures being kind of like robots.
Right.
Yeah,
And
cyborgs.
Cyborgs. Well, they're
Well,
robots.
They're robots.
She's a cyborg,
Right.
I guess, technically, because all of those parts that were stolen were replaced with
like,
robot parts.
Robots who are now like using her tongue to eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so she is on this mission to retrieve what is hers, to retrieve her human experience. And in the conversation, we talk about it on kind of two levels, where I talk about how the human experience is like very precious and that we are entitled to it. It is our birthright to share our human experience. But also it is about female bodily autonomy and all of that stuff. So it is it's an idea that I am tremendously attached to and I'm currently noodling on in my normal life. And I've never seen it expressed in exactly this way. And for me, the violence expressing her undercurrent of rage is extremely evocative for me.
Yeah. And the book looks so good.
It is so beautiful. And, like this artist, Atsushi Kaneko, has a very individual style, a very amalgamated style, which is also bending towards the reverence of the god of manga. So there's just so much there.
Yeah. I loved this conversation with Christopher and Deb, and I'm excited to share it with all of you. Search and Destroy comes out from Fantagraphics on July 23rd. Hit up your bookstore just in time for Comic-Con. I think it's the type of book that you will love whether you've read a bajillion manga stories or no manga stories.
And it's a book you can read fast and slow, which is fun too.
Yeah. And I think I read it fast, and then I saw how much fun you had reading it slow, and then I feel like I need to go back and have my own slow version of it.
Yeah.
It's ultimately going to end up being 3 volumes. Volume 1 is more than a tease, but it definitely gets you going for like, oh, I need that.
I need 2 now. I need it right now.
But we got to practice patience, Lisa. All right, so before we get to our conversation with Christopher and Deb, we need to talk about some news that happened last week. Normally, this would be the section of the show where we do our referrals segment, but unfortunately, friends, Omnibus is no more.
And we're heartbroken.
Travis and Company issued a statement last week that they would be closing up shop and you can no longer purchase comics through Omnibus, the app, or the browser. And yeah, you say heartbroken, I'm devastated. I loved Omnibus. I loved the experience of reading and buying comics and subscribing to comics on Omnibus. I think it was such a hopeful beacon within the comic book community.
And we would love to see a small company with the ethos of Omnibus selling comics online really work for the publishers, work for the store.
It's hard though, finding, achieving profitability is almost an impossible task for the little person within this field.
Within this field entirely.
I mean, and we're talking about Comic Book Couples Counseling also, right?
Right.
And our partnership with them meant so much to us. Not only did they support us financially with this sponsorship, it came at such a critical moment for Comic Book Couples Counseling. We really needed it at that time. And their sponsorship was a validation of what we're trying to do here at Comic Book Couples Counseling. It was words of affirmation. It filled our love tank. It in itself was an act of love towards us. It meant so much.
And it was a true partnership.
Yes.
We were united in the mission of making comics accessible to everyone. And I really hope there is another startup out there who is ready to take up the torch in a way that is fair both to the consumer and the people making our comics.
Yes. So our hearts really go out to everyone at Omnibus. I can't imagine what the last couple of weeks have been like for them. It must have been absolutely devastating. It's such a hard thing to make that final decision of like, look, it's just not going to happen for us. So it's sad to say goodbye, but I do feel like Omnibus made its mark over the last year. It will be remembered within the community. It will certainly be remembered by Brad and Lisa.
They were true champions of the medium, and I'm not going to stop looking for those champions. And I really feel like Christopher Woodrow-Butcher and Deb Aoki are also champions. They're out there representing and standing for their stories.
Yeah. So on that note, let's get to our conversation with them. Search and Destroy, out July 23rd from Fantagraphics. Christopher and Deb, welcome to Comic Book Couples Counseling. Hello.
Hello. It's so lovely to be here.
Thank you for having us.
I would love if we could go back in time to the origin of Mangasplaining and get to what the initial mission statement of your podcast venture was.
It was funny, actually. Deb and I were with David Brothers, who does the podcast with us, and Chip Zdarsky in Japan. We were just sort of buds, and we were all going to go to Japan at the same time together. And I remember we were on a train that was a pretty long one from sort of the northern tip of the main island into Sapporo. And we were just sort of talking about manga and explaining stuff to Chip. And he's like, this is a podcast right now, what we're doing. And I was like, no, we're just trying to make you less sad about, because I'll be honest with you, we got to Japan and Chip didn't really realize how big manga actually was. So we go to the first used manga store, the first Mandarake, and it's not just stuff that's out now, it's stuff that's like the last 60 years of manga history. And it was blowing his mind. He's like, why does anyone need to create anything? Why does anything need to be made? There's still so much that we haven't seen. And so by the time we got to Sapporo, it had worn off a little bit, and we were just talking about manga. And he's like, this is a podcast. You have to explain manga to me, and we'll record it instead of just wasting it on the train, basically. And so that's kind of what the podcast grew out of.
He came up with the name, didn't he?
Yeah, Mangasplaining was all him.
You have this beautiful podcast that Lisa and I tune into because we feel a lot like Chip Zdarsky. You know, we've mentioned this a little bit already in this episode, but we came to manga very late, very, very late. Like I would say that we really didn't start reading it until the pandemic. And it was a
and thousands of other people, apparently.
exactly. And it did feel like this tremendous gateway into into this medium that we already love called comics. And so now here you are. You had the podcast, and then you evolved it into actually bringing comics to the people. How does this little imprint of Mangasplaining Extra begin?
Oh, I guess. Can I answer your question with a question?
Yes.
So I just listened, and you guys have been comic book podcast host for a long time, but now you want to write comics, I hear, and even write comics together.
It's true.
We all look at the industry, I think, anyone who's sufficiently invested in it, and goes, that anywhere between, I have something that I would like to say to, I could do all of this better. I could do every single thing. Make me president of Marvel for the week, and we'll see what happens. We were somewhere in the middle, I think. I know Deb and I would talk we'd go to Japan and we'd see these cool manga, and it'd be like, why is no one licensing this? And we'd both sort of despair. And I think that's probably the earliest germ of the Mangasplaining publishing stuff. Deb and I both seeing these works that weren't being translated that could really do something different if they were brought to North America. And I know we're going to talk about Search and Destroy, but Deb, I think the anecdote around the British Museum show and Gigatown, that might be a good one to share with the listeners here.
Yeah, so about 5 years ago at the British Museum, there was a huge manga exhibit. It was only at the British Museum. It never traveled. I went all the way to London to it, and I have no regrets because it was such an amazing, expansive show of all kinds of manga, from the history to the most current. A lot of stuff was not in English at the time, and have since been published in English. But one of the features of the show was this beginning part was these charming comic strips about the symbols of manga or manpu. You know, the little star that's supposed to symbolize you're irritated because your blood veins are throbbing, or like the little vertical lines that means like, oh, you're in despair, things like that. Like there's some very distinct visual language in manga that is unique to manga. So I thought, oh, and then the characters are all like these little rabbits and frogs and stuff like that. And the reason for that is it's based off of the Choju Higa, which is a famous scroll from the 12th century in Japan that is considered one of the earliest examples of whimsical visual storytelling in Japan. So anyway, I when I went to the show and that tweet thread popped up this week, funny, amazing, where I said, oh my God, this is such an amazing comic. And why won't someone publish this in English? And lo and behold, 5 years later, we did. We are. And so those are the kind of things that, yes, it kind of made my day to realize that we had come that far.
We had a lot of titles sort of sitting in our respective back pockets, so to speak, of stuff that we'd love to see get published one day. The first book was this one, just called Okinawa. And sorry, I said this one like anyone can see. Sorry, all. We published, but it's sitting here right next to me. And it was just this amazing story, a series of stories about an Okinawan man's experience, like familial experiences during World War II, and then in present day with the ongoing occupation by the U.S. military bases and the sort of poor treatment from the main islands of Japan. And it was like, this again is just a story that's not being told, and it's something that I pitched around for a number of years until I was finally like, okay, let's sort of put it together and do it. And at a certain point I just realized we don't have the money to do it. We had gotten some translators and we're going to start a company maybe, and paid the letterer and all that kind of stuff, and it was still just like just making a book isn't enough, because you still have to print it, and you have to warehouse it, and you have to distribute it, and you have to put it in people's hands. And that's all specialized skills. That's a lot of people that work in the comic book industry that are mostly invisible, mostly behind the scenes. And tons of work goes into getting a comic book into your comic book shop every Wednesday, let alone I actually went to the bookstore in the Kinokuniya in Tokyo and found a copy of Okinawa there. Like that's quite a journey that book took from Malaysia, where it was printed, to Fantagraphics' warehouse, in Seattle, to back to Tokyo. So that was the journey. We finally got the opportunity when Substack started and did their creator program. I know a lot of the creators that you've interviewed have, ended up working with Substack. Chip had worked with Substack, and everyone there had a name except for me. And they're like, well, what do you bring to the table? When I was sort of pitching them, and I'm like, I will publish manga on your platform. And they were like, oh, we don't have any manga. And I tried to be clear up front, like, I'm going to publish weirdo manga and like sad manga. And they kind of like, they're like, yeah, but you'll put a hit in there, right? Like, we'll get one hit. And I was like, yeah, there's one I want to do called Search and Destroy. So the first book was Okinawa, and we serialized that over the course of, I think, 5 or 6 months. And then we also did some short stories that we commissioned from mangaka that we like to work with, including a cool one by Taiyo Matsumoto. And from there, it was we just showed that, that we had the drive to do this Mangasplaining Extra, this Substack program. And so when we approached publishers a second time going, hey, we've got this story, we really want to do it, they were 100% committed, because we had basically a finished product and they had to, do the heavy lifting, the literal heavy lifting of having all these printed books. I don't want to make it sound like Eric Reynolds at Fantagraphics wasn't in our corner from the beginning, because he really was. He was great. But it's one thing to be like, so when are you going to turn in a book so we could talk about publishing it, to I have a finished book, can we publish it now? And he was like, yeah, 100%. So yeah, talking to Eric, the Substack program that gave us a little bit of seed money to help get the serializations going and to get everything done. That was huge. So shout out and thank you to Nick Spencer, Chip Zdarsky, and Eric Reynolds at Fantagraphics, and Eric Coe at Udon. Actually, too many Erics, who've really supported the Mangasplaining Extra publishing program from the very beginning.
I can't tell you, like the book design for Okinawa is amazing. It is so different than the Japanese edition.
We are searching because we also have our copy. So
oh, wonderful! Thank you so much.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the level of craft and care they put into it really matches the book. And we when we just had preview copies, we did ALA last year, and we hand sold it to every librarian we could talk to. I mean, we talked to librarians who were had libraries at military bases, for example, or history teachers, people who like people who are Asian studies scholars, and we think that had a real impact in the critical response we got for it. Like, that we got on so many best of the year lists and many that normally don't have manga on them, including like the
Don't
great
even have comics at all. Yeah, it was kind of
right.
wild.
It
Yeah,
was
we got a
wild.
couple of
And
newspaper ones that were great.
it was so great, and I'm half Okinawan myself, and so many of these stories in here are things I didn't know about Okinawa. So I'm really proud of this book, and I'm so glad that, while I didn't have a part in producing it, I'm so proud that we have it out there in the world.
How has the curation process been for you, like emotionally? Does it feel like, okay, now we have this platform and now I'm panicked because, we only have a sliver of what's available in Japan and the United States, and now you have all of these options, right? Or is it like, I have so many beautiful directions to go that as long as I choose something that I like, I'm making a good choice? I'm taking my cue from like when you're a little kid, pick a cupcake, and you go like, "There's no wrong answers because there are so many great cupcakes," and then they cry. Like that's
Yeah.
me. I'm the kid who cries from too many cupcakes. So like emotionally, how is curation for you and having to be a person who chooses?
It's tough because some of the best stuff out there is very long. Like has more than 3 or 4 volumes. And, I don't know if most people know this, but when you license manga, the more volumes you have, there's a sharp attrition rate. Like the first volume will sell the most, second, third, and fourth will start selling less and less and less. So the more volumes you have, the greater risk you have. And the greater investment that you're asked to make, because the Japanese publisher licensor will say, well, you're on the hook for all of them. And it's like, yeah.
I feel like we talk over a lot of the stuff that we're going to do, but I do feel like I'm making Deb sad a lot of the time. She's like, I really, really want to do this book, and I'm like, oh, that one is with a publisher that I know doesn't want to work with us, so we can't do that one. And it's just like it's a bummer, I guess. But it's, again, there's no shortage. Like, we've got a little scratch pad in Word or Excel that's just like everything that we want to do. And right now, for example, we won't say what the title is, but a publisher we haven't worked with, Deb hopefully just gave them copies of a book that we want to do with them that would be perfect for them, for example. And so this is something that Deb and I talked about over a year ago now. And then we finally got to see the publisher in person at AX this past weekend and give them the copies and really talk up why we wanted to do it. And then maybe we'll find out in a couple months. So yeah, I think the curation process is, we're just both really excited about manga. The harder part is just how long everything takes when there's not, when you're a little bit more flexible as a company. Let's say we're a little bit smaller, a little bit more flexible, but because of that, there's not just, we're working only on Mangasplaining extra 40 hours a week. And so that's probably the hardest part, is that the curation would hurt less if we could afford to print more books, publish more books, you know what I mean?
And
So yeah,
to the Japanese publishers, we're a new company. And so what we're doing is kind of unique in that we are finding books and then pairing up with the right publisher, distributor that would do that book the best, do well for that book, because each manga publisher has a slightly different focus and personality. So what I try to tell, publishers and licensors is, if you give us a book, we're going to put it with the publisher that'll do right by it, production wise and distribution wise and marketing wise, and we'll do everything we can to make sure people know about it and how special it is. Because there's a lot of manga publishers out there who put out 10, 20 books a month, and sometimes they put out something that's quite special that they don't have time to do bespoke marketing for, right?
yeah.
We on the other hand have only one child at a time.
Yeah,
And
that's actually what's
do it
been
up.
so amazing about our books, is that we're really between Mangasplaining the podcast and sending things out on Substack and Deb's enormous Twitter presence, we're just banging the drum about one book or maybe two books at most, and that's all we're talking about for like 3 or 4 months. We're building up an audience before the print volume ever comes out, and that's something that a lot of manga publishers just can't afford to do, and it's kind of awesome, actually.
We just love this stuff.
Yeah.
You guys are the Jerry Maguire of manga publishing. That's
Oh, my
so
goodness.
cool. Like, do you find as you're finding your way that you're developing principles around like this is what should be considered? You know, like you talk about, oh, you have to match the right book to the right publisher, and like, so do you find yourself going like, okay, these are the things about manga publishing that we specifically stand for?
I don't think I have that. Deb, do you?
I think for Mangasplaining, like, and I've talked. Believe me, I had a ton of meetings at Anime Expo where all these new manga publishers want to come into the market, and I was telling them like, what's your editorial point of view?
Right.
What are you publishing, and what will people know you for? Like one publisher I talked to is like, oh, we're going to publish this really action-packed, super violent manga, and I said, oh, and then what else are you going to announce? And they said, oh, we don't know. We're going to like that. So it's like if you, whatever you're coming out of the gate with, and the title that they're wanting to come out of the gate with is a very well-known and very action-packed series. I said, you're basically hitting people in the throat with yuzu kosho, like hot chili pepper, strong flavors. And so if you're serving your wagyu steak with your yuzu kosho and you're giving them macarons, that's people are going to get confused. You know, like. So have an identity and then go out with it, right? But so Mangasplaining, do we have an identity or point of view? I think we do, in that we are putting out manga that we believe in and manga that we think normally wouldn't get out there. You know, and we everything we publish we genuinely like. You know, it's not like we're like, oh well, this is us. This is going to be a hit anime, but we just have to do it. Like everything we publish are things we personally feel strongly about, and not all publishers have that luxury, right? So
why might your choices not get out there? Like what makes them not on somebody else's pedestal?
I would say
I can talk about Okinawa if you don't
go
mind. Yeah, because I think that's the easiest one to explain. But from there, I think there's like any number of reasons, and Deb's gonna blow us away with them. But Okinawa is by Susumu Higa, and his art style is what you might call a bit naive. And I think this is his earliest illustrated. Like he just went down one day and he's like, I need to tell this story, and I'm going to tell it to the best of my ability using manga. And he wasn't a popular or published mangaka. He in fact doesn't refer to himself as a manga creator, mangaka. He's like an illustrator and a storyteller is how he refers to himself. And if you look at that work, it's like, oh, this doesn't look like the commercial manga that's blowing up the charts right now. And even within like art manga and art comics and things like that, there is still a lot of the choices of what's made to publish are books that have a really super high degree of like artistic, traditional artistic skill. You know what I mean? And so something like Okinawa, it's like, oh man, is there another book about Okinawa that looks like it was drawn like Naruto? And it's like, no, this guy is the guy. He lived the life. We believe in this book. And when you meet someone like Fantagraphics, who's like, oh yeah, we get that. We publish people who we believe in, who people don't necessarily don't rate the same way, let's say, then that's awesome. Like that's that synergy. It's the same thing like Gigatown looks old. It's using characters from a like little funny animal characters from like a 12th century scroll. Or the next book that we're doing with Udon is Veil. And it's a full color manga that was serialized online on Twitter, but no manga publisher wants to publish a full color manga. It's so much more expensive than publishing a black and white trade paperback than it is to do this like beautiful color sort of a situation. So that's why that one wasn't picked up for so long. Sorry, it's not. Oh, there you go. It's almost done like pencil sketches and color. It looks like fashion illustration. gorgeous. It's going to come
It's
out
really
next year.
I'm
We
excited.
did.
It's
Yeah,
a
and so
lovely, like it's a grown-up romance between a military a soldier or a police officer and a young woman who is very beautiful, but she's blind. And so it has this really lovely kind of slice of life, kind of French movie vibe to it. It's really beautifully drawn. I mean, I discovered this artist because she did uh Mad Max Fury Road Dojinshi.
Hey, yeah.
She
Now
did
you're
really
speaking
good
both
ones.
of our language.
yeah,
I mean, she did
and
like
then
amazing like stories about like the what do you call those boys in
The War Boys.
the war boys? Great, amazing art. So I kept following her, and then when she started actually making something to publish, I was like, sign me up.
there's so little manga published in North America, and that's going to sound crazy to you and crazy to your listeners, but there's so little manga published in North America compared to what's being published in Japan that it's just easier to go for the low-hanging fruit. The shonen selling well, we get shonen, violent action manga, seinen manga selling well, we'll get that. Maybe a few shoujo titles, maybe a few kids titles, and that's what publishers look at and go, this is doing well in the market. But it's like, no, this is an unexplored area of the market, and we can attract these people who aren't currently manga readers or aren't currently comic fans. And that's a harder pitch. It's a much harder sell, but it can work. So far, so good. Okinawa did really well. We're really excited about the pre-orders on Search and Destroy, and the response to our announcement
Search
on
and
Giga Challenge
Destroy,
has been
man. I mean, that one, Atsushi
yeah.
Kaneko, if you've seen the artwork, he's a virtuoso. Like, you could easily have published this as an image comic, and you wouldn't even blink. You wouldn't go like, oh, it's a manga. No,
Yeah.
he just does beautiful mastery of like darks, black and white, and action, very stylized and very both elegant and violent and gripping. It's kind of criminal that his work isn't more published in English. And he's doing a current series called Evil, which is about superheroes. And my secret hope is that, Search and Destroy does really well, and some publisher will be inspired to pick up Evil as well. Because there's so much more to manga than just one typical style of art or typical style of story. That's what I feel like sometimes, because when I teach my class at CCA, one of my first sections is, this is manga, this is manga, this is manga. Like I show all different types of styles and art styles and stories. It's like, manga is a medium for storytelling. It is not a genre. It's like movies are a medium for storytelling. There are all kinds of movies, all kinds of directors, all kinds of looks. It's not like, I think sometimes people think manga is a genre, that it all looks a certain way, all has a certain type of story, and it's like, it's not. Manga is basically the primary entertainment storytelling medium in Japan. Their movie industry is very weak, by the way.
Right.
Their movie and TV industry is very, very weak compared to the US. So a lot of the creative talent in Japan, the storytelling, the artistic talent, goes into manga.
No, a lot of the TV and film ends up adapted from manga. Like Evil, which is Atsushi Kaneko's book, already has a TV series that I think did the first few volumes, because they're desperate for stories, and manga's where all the good stories are happening. So
we find ourselves as champions of Western comics having that same conversation of there is a comic for every person, for every kind of reader, for every kind of story. And comics are comics, right? So you go into like a Barnes and Noble, and you'll have the comic section, and you'll have the manga section, and you'll have some really interesting like cross-pollination both ways with the books, where you'll go and you'll pick up a book from the manga section, and you go like, oh, this is by an American writer, but it is in that manga style, and you read it backwards. Or you go into the Western comic section, and there will be very manga influenced stuff there. And I find myself going like, hey, you're a manga reader, you would love more comics, right? Who wouldn't? And there are ways that it is right to have a general conversation about all comics are comics, but there are ways that there has to be two conversations where they really aren't the same thing. So I you don't have to go into tremendous detail, because this is a big question. But like, what is a conversation that we should be having about all comics together as a medium? And what are conversations that really do have to be separate? Like this is a manga conversation and this is like a Western comic conversation.
Well, I recently came back from Seoul and I went to a really amazing comics cafe. It was beautiful, modern, 3 stories. You go in, you pay $10 and you can sit for however long you want. You'll get free drinks. There's sofas and blankets and you can browse whatever comics you want.
I love that.
And graphic novels. And you can buy them if you want at a discount. They had American comics. They had American graphic novels like your X-Men, Iron Man, whatever. They had Alex Ross art books. And then they had Raina Telgemeier. They had Scott Pilgrim. They had Korean comics, Japanese comics. It was all in Korean. But in the shelves, it was split up by story type, sports, slice of life, coming of age, feminism, politics. So I could go sit there and just pick out books and just enjoy them. And then like when I was finished reading, I'd put it in a cart and then the staff put it back where it was on the shelf. But it was an omnivorous approach to enjoying comics. And it was of course there was a couple interesting things about, like, it was you had to be 19 and over to get in. So that way, they didn't have to worry about kids and whatever. And of course they serve beer and wine. Yahoo! I mean, of course, but you would use an app and then you could order a beer and you'd pay a little extra, but they would bring it to your table. So immediately I thought, I want to do this. And I wish there was more like this, because I think comics readers are more omnivorous than we think. I mean, yes, there are people who only read manga. Yes, there are people who only read American comics, but I think we're coming into a world where people just like good stories. And we have to be able to give it to them in a way that makes sense for them. Like when I do my best and worst manga panel at Comic-Con, I don't say best shonen manga, best seinen manga. I say best new manga for kids and teens, best new manga for grown-ups. And because one of the best kids manga was originally published in an adult magazine in Japan. So I feel like some people like to gatekeep this terminology about manga. Oh, shonen manga, seinen manga, blah blah blah. But it's like, to me, manga is much more diverse than that. And actually, this is the interwebs. Everyone's reading each other, like like Peach Momoko, right? She's like one of the top artists at Marvel. And then when Briley O'Malley came to Japan to give a talk, we had a great crowd of Japanese college students who were just thrilled to meet him.
Yeah, we shouldn't say anything yet, but Peach Momoko is a really big Search and Destroy fan. ...
Okay.
So, I do think maybe the conversation that is for everything is no one's being paid enough to make comics. None of the creators who make comics are being paid enough to make the comics, almost exclusively, especially in the first 5 to 10 years of their career. And that is probably the conversation that everyone should be having on every continent on Earth where comics are big, is that people deserve a living wage. And I understand from the publisher's point of view as well. I've seen the numbers, and sometimes you just can't afford to pay that higher page rate because there's no money. Like the book is losing money or going to lose money or whatever. And I get it, but that means much fairer contracts on the back end for when things are adapted. I know that there's still a lot of really bad contracts out there that have publishers scooping up too many rights and too much authority over different creations that aren't theirs. I think what Scott McCloud just said it best 30 years ago: you should fully own that which you fully create. And I still think as an industry we are not able to live up to that, and that is not just the North American industry, that is worldwide, unfortunately. So yeah, that would be the conversation we all have to have together, for sure. As for conversations we want to have apart, I think manga publishers are scared to invite non-manga readers into the fold, and I think it goes both ways there as well. Manga is such a juggernaut that I know that people tiptoe from North American publishing. They tiptoe into the manga pool because fans can get upset if it looks inauthentic or Sorry, and there's any number of reasons. That's not even the biggest one, but
Because fans are
I
fans,
think
and we're sensitive people. We're making mistakes.
fans are fans.
It's a lovely way
And
to put it, sensitive.
fans are fans, sensitive people, sensitive people. So yeah, that would be the other thing I would say is maybe maybe the conversations we have to have separately are about the importance of having those conversations together. I think we need to speak to the individual fan bases, the individual readerships first, to be like, it's okay if, because so many young people, especially, their whole identities are tied up in the manga that they read, especially in online spaces. And yeah, that's not healthy, bro. It's not cool. But that's the same thing with a lot of the superhero stuff that I participated willingly in for 30 years. So I get it. I get why, but I think that's a conversation that needs to happen, maybe as just like we are part of a larger publishing ecosystem, and that's okay. That's okay.
Like, let's welcome grown-ups into the fold.
Yes.
And let's welcome grown-ups who aren't just diehard superhero fans, right? Like, when I talk with people who are like literary, like people book readers, they still only talk about Mouse and Watchmen. It's like, did you know that there's actually a lot more books that come out within the last 20 years that you might actually like? That
30,
have pictures
40
and
years.
Yeah.
So it's like, and then there are people who like, oh, they only watched Akira. It's like, there's other anime that you might actually like. So, like Delicious in Dungeon, like, has really blown up, and that's been really great to watch, and the Netflix has made that possible. But I think in welcoming grown-ups into the world of comics, where that's obvious and built into Japan, but not as obvious and built in America.
Yeah. I think in America, comics kind of began as a juvenile medium, and it's taken more than my lifetime to get to a point where I can get my dad to talk about comics, but I can't get my dad to read a comic.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
There's a weird lifestyle of comics culture in the United States where we put comics in kids' hands and then we gradually take them back out of kids' hands, where you go like, we want to get our kid to read, we will give them a comic. Okay, now they can read, we want to take the comic away from them. Or in the more general like idea of like, oh, let's give our kids comics. Oh, they are getting messaging that we did not anticipate from the comics. Now let's take comics away from them because we don't want them to turn into socialists or whatever,
Well, that's true. I mean, so comics are, as you well know, comics in library circles are a flashpoint, right? That you can have the same content in prose, but as soon as it's words and pictures, it becomes a target for certain angry people who want to make trouble. But I would say too that I think because I've visited Japan and Korea, and I find that our culture of especially our librarians and booksellers, are really behind comics as a great literacy tool, a great educational tool, much more than I've seen in Japan, where Japan still treats manga as junk food. I mean, librarians and teachers treat it as junk food, and they don't generally have it in their libraries. They go, well, you can just buy it. Go buy that Jujutsu Kaisen. You go, kid. But you're not going to find it in my library because we have real books here.
A lot of schools actually are not. I don't think a lot of people know this. A lot of schools, you're not allowed to bring manga to school.
Oh, yeah. In my day job, I work with kids, and they know that I'm into comics, and they find that really interesting and weird.
Oh, really?
And I do hear a lot, like, where they're told, oh, you can't put comics on your reading log because comics aren't books,
Wow.
Yeah, it's really sad. And I go, don't listen to them. I'm not a parent. I don't care. Don't listen to them. Comics are totally books. They're totally literature. I do want to get into Search and Destroy. I absolutely devoured it today.
Yay!
And
great. Thank you.
I just loved how, like, you get, like, the preciousness of the human existence, like the human experience by how desperate she is to get her senses back. But I also find it extremely evocative seeing these robots basely enjoy the human experience and recognizing how precious it is and wanting to use it for their own means. And I feel like
Made me appreciate my tongue today.
I feel like that is what I experience when I experience a good story, like where I read a really good book and I recognize a piece of myself in that book, you know, and I go like, oh, I did not know I was missing this thing from myself. And I just wonder personally, your relationship with Search and Destroy, like how does this story affect you and influence your thinking, but also like, you know, how stories in general have enriched your life.
Search and Destroy is fascinating because you can really boil it down to a lot of different themes, like depending on what you're doing. But bodily autonomy is the one that I take from it. It's a young woman who's just been brutalized, not just by people, but by a system. And she's very lucky in that she has been rebuilt after this has happened to her in a way that allows her to recapture pieces of who she was and who she would have been otherwise. And that's maybe what the best science fiction, SF, you know, speculative fiction is supposed to do. It's supposed to really drill down to something about us as humans and be like, what would you be like if you could do all these things, but you didn't feel like yourself anymore? That it was all grafted on, you know what I mean, in place of the things that you should have had. And there's so many questions around that, I think, that are asked in this first volume that start to get answered in the second volume, and the answers aren't always pleasing as well. What happens when you have, you know, crazy awesome legs that allow you to jump onto moving cars to get back, you know, the eyes or the tongues that was the tongue that was stolen from you? Spoilers. What happens when you get your legs back and you can't do that anymore? And it's that much harder for you to actually fight against these absolutely vile creatures that have stole things from you. Was that better before when you could fight your way back? Or are you worse off now? Are you better off now? Even though you aren't as strong as you were, you weren't as fast as you were. These are really big questions that this series asks, but also about who we are and what society values. And yeah, there's a couple of bombshells in volume 2. I don't want to give it away, but like just this first volume, yeah, it's the questions that it asks, believe me, they all get answered and then some. And it's something that really affected me in the telling. I'll be honest with you, I had actually wanted to publish work by Atsushi Kaneko for a really long time. I worked at Viz in 2017, and he was one of the first artists I brought in. And was like, it's criminal this guy hasn't been translated. He's got, I think, 9 or 10 volumes of manga in different series. And his work is so idiosyncratic that a lot of the editors that were there just were like, yeah, it's good, but it's not really my thing, so I don't want to take it on as a project. And you look and he talks about his influences, and his influences are Charles Burns and Daniel Clowes and Rat Fink and all these other non-manga people. And he's got this base of manga, obviously, you can see in his work, but his style has evolved over the years to really incorporate all these international ideas. And so
And
if you're
rock
just
and
a pure
roll, by
manga
the way.
fan,
Yeah,
rock
the punk
and roll,
Rock
yeah.
and roll, punk rock, you know, like anger and fire. Like I first met him a couple years ago. We went to karaoke. He sang
yeah.
I
Ramones
stay with
songs.
it too. Yeah.
He did it really well.
Mm. So yeah, I think originally I had wanted to do another book, but when I started to read this one, I was just like, yeah, this is the one. This is the one for this moment. Talking to young women, especially about autonomy and about your right to move through the world in the way that you want to. So I think that's it's not exactly a lucky break. That is a theme that recurs in his work, but for this particular book, especially as at only 3 volumes, I think it's really going to hit once we get it out into the wider world.
It's also true that it's like if you've read the original Dororo, it's set in like feudal Japan, and Hyakumaru is a boy.
Yeah.
So he basically gender bent the story. He put it in this dystopian, semi-Russian looking fascist society. So, you know, props to Tezuka Productions for allowing the Kaneko Sensei to take the heart of this story and reimagine it in a way that was true to him and true to his vision and way of visual storytelling and his messages. Inherently, the heart of the original Tezuka story is there, but what he did with it is just as revolutionary as what Naoki Urasawa did with Pluto, the Astro Boy story for Pluto. So to me, that's a higher level of lesson that the comics world can take from Tezuka Pro, meaning that they still honor the legacy of Osamu Tezuka and his stories, but they're very open to this generation's or new generations taking the heart of Tezuka's message and characters and reinterpreting them in ways that are fresh and new for readers today. That's pretty rare, you know?
I really enjoyed the foreword by Federico Anzalone, and he talked about how by looking at his comic through the reinterpretation of a story, but also like through the Tezuka lens, how that changed his tone, where that anger is still there, but like how I interpreted the foreword is that reverence for the form brought an optimism to his story that he might not have otherwise. I'm just like, that's just how I interpreted it. I've read the first volume and this is the only thing I've read by him. To me, forwards are so critical, especially, you know, for books from cultures that I am not fully immersed
We need some Mangasplaining.
I need the Mangasplaining. and I try to be very humble about it, you know, but like I do miss a thing as a child where you pick up a book and you don't care about the forward and you just go right and you just free fall like right into a story and you go like, I'm a human being. This was written by a human being. That's enough for me. Here we go. You know what I mean?
So like Chip on the podcast.
Yeah, Chip doesn't like reading the forwards.
Any forwards, any backup material, he's just not doing it. He's like, I'm here for the comic book. I will read the manga, and nothing else in this manga matters literally at all to me. So
he's busy.
Yeah, there are still lots of readers like that.
Yeah, no, it's cool, and it's a recurring theme with us, right? Where it's like one Chip is like juggling how many different books he's writing. So naturally, he's busy and he doesn't have time for the complicated forwards, but. You know, I think we try to do that with our books, like the introduction to Search and Destroy, something we commissioned because Federico had interviewed and met Kaneko Sensei in France, and so we asked him to do this, and he did a bang up job. For Giga Town, we invited Matt Alt, who wrote the book Pure Invention, how Japanese culture changed the world. He's a good friend of ours, and he gave the context, like here's why there are bunnies and frogs. You know, this is from the Choju Giga, and he explained the history of manga because that's not in the Japanese edition. In the Japanese edition, they assume you know all this.
Right, right.
So we try to give our editions of our books that extra bit, you know, like, and in Okinawa, there's a exclusive interview with Higa Sensei that Christopher and Jocelyn Allen, the translator, did. So we think, you know, going that extra mile really makes a difference.
Actually, Okinawa is interesting because we included a whole essay that explains the Okinawan, I don't want to boil it down to separatist movement, but definitely like the Okinawan independence movement for people that have never heard it before. And there's like a whole essay at the back. So it's like, oh, what is happening in Okinawa? You can go read that and it's in the book and you don't have to worry about it. But if you just were like, oh, these were great stories and I'm glad I read that, great, you can move on.
You can do that too.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes when you read a forward, like you go like, it does shed a light on how much you don't know. And I think sometimes that is the thing that intimidates people from crossing over from Western comics to manga is going like, well, how will I know how much is going over my head? And like, what is the best way to give someone permission to miss stuff when they're reading manga for the first time?
Can I just say that I'm Japanese American? I'm like third, fourth generation Japanese American. I run into stuff in manga all the time. I was like, what the hell's going on here? Or I didn't know that. Or wait, you know, like, wait, this cultural reference, what? So, I mean, and I've been marinated in manga for most of my life and Japanese culture. Please give yourself permission to not know what's going on because oftentimes I don't either. But that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun of discovering stuff, you know?
Yeah, that's what I say to friends who want to get into X-Men comics. You know, just read it.
Just read it and like take what you will, and that's what
Yeah.
Google's for, you know? Why the hell is this person doing this? And wait, she got reborn 3 times?
Yeah.
Hello, Wikipedia.
Give it a few years. There'll be another #1. You can just start reading there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A few years, like 6 months.
We are taking up so much of your time, and we really appreciate you. I'm having the best time.
Lisa's got a list of questions.
Some questions.
Oh, some more? Okay.
I'm so sorry. So Ben Applegate is the translator for this. I, as the reader, am putting a tremendous amount of trust into Ben Applegate translating this text for me as a reader. Like, how do you go about choosing the right translator for a book? Like, what are the nuanced skills that maybe someone who doesn't quite understand the gravity of translation are you looking for?
Usually I'll give somebody the book first and let them read it and go, if it's someone we've worked with before, especially, is this the kind of thing that you would like to work on? And that's how it went with Okinawa. Jocelyn and I were on board together, and Andrew were on board together from the get-go, because that was sort of before Mangasplaining. For Search and Destroy, Ben came on the project because he was a fan. He was talking to Deb, and Deb's like, oh, we just licensed Search and Destroy. And he's like, I translated the first volume for fun one day because I love it so much. That's how we chose Ben. He chose us, actually. And the same thing happened with the letterer. When I was talking to the letterer, he said, no, I'm too busy to take on any work. I'm like, oh, it's too bad. I think he'd be really good on Search and Destroy. And he's like, oh, you didn't tell me. Okay. I guess I'm doing Search and Destroy.
Up job.
He's amazing. He's so good.
If you look
Phil
at
Christie.
the Japanese
Phil Christie, everybody.
and his work, like Phil Christie's work, the Japanese edition and the English edition side by side, he retained the feel of Kaneko
It's so hard to do.
sound effects and the mood. Same thing with Ben. Ben captured the voice of the characters so well. I can't, like we are so lucky that we can attract people to our projects that are passionate about it.
And not just passionate, but knowledgeable in their
Yes.
field. Like we picked Ko Ransom. We offered it to him, and he had never worked with Udon at that point to do Gigatown. And it was like, he's someone who actually really likes Japanese wordplay and Japanese sort of like subtle humor and things like that. And he lives full time in Japan. So for a book like Gigatown, which really relies a lot on very subtle humor and a lot of historical and like cultural resonance, he was great. And then Andrew, who was the editor on that book, didn't have most of that. So when his translation would come in and he'd be like, I still don't understand what this means, then Ko could explain it to Andrew. Andrew could be like, oh, could we do this to maybe explain the point, and back and forth. So I think actually Gigatown probably had the harshest editorial process of any of the books that we've done, where they really went back and forth to make sure that everything came across, because it's so spare and there's a lot of chance to get things wrong. So that's kind of amazing. But honestly, Ben is a professional manga editor in his free time, and then is translating. Ben is a professional manga editor full time and a translator in his free time. And so his scripts came in. They're generally really, really good. I only have to do a bit of a once over. Eric has to do a bit of a once over. And then, it's good to print. And that's the same thing where we were just looking at Vale now. Deb's working on another book as well, No Roses Without Thorns, that are just the editorial process. We get this feedback and we look at, another thing we do, and I know Deb does this as well, we'll compare the translations we get in English to the French translations, which we can sometimes read as well. And it's to see how everyone made different choices in translating a work. And then if something is significantly different, we can go back to our translators and like, the French translator did this. And sometimes they're like, yeah, that kind of is the same, but it has this other zhuzh, so maybe we could try this. And sometimes they're like, oh, they missed the point. Actually, don't use that. They're like, they missed this and this and this point of it. So tons of back and forth on the editing of our books. And it's not a sexy answer, but it's put the work in, like put a lot of work in. And we can only do it because we're working on very few projects at a time. I know.
And it's also to say that, like AI generated manga translation is a hot topic nowadays. And we're here to say, no.
Yeah, like a solid no. Oh my God.
Solid no. Because we know many translators who work with, get told by their clients, oh, here's the AI version, go just zhuzh it up and take less money because it's less work for you. And it's like, no. a lot of them end up having to start over from scratch because
Yeah.
Japanese is a very nuanced language, and different types of stories will have certain different tones, right? Like there's
Mhm.
gendered language and non-gendered language in Japanese, and sometimes that's a key plot point that you
Yeah.
don't know what gender the character is until later.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go. Like human language is a very nuanced language, and it takes a
Yes.
human to interpret it for another human.
So yeah, I'm just here. I mean, no shade to those tech bros, but I wouldn't buy that stock right now.
No. It's
Stop using our tongue, robots. Stop
yes,
it.
exactly.
It's not sexy. It's gross.
Well, it's been our experience that passion attracts passion, and clearly your passion has attracted a lot of great collaborators to what you are all doing, and your podcast. You know, that's the podcast, right? Is the passion that you put out into the world. It attracts the passion of your audience, and Lisa and I are in awe of everything that you are doing. We talk about comics, and there is something about comics where if you talk enough about comics, you read comics, you obsess over comics. At some point, you want to touch
You want-
comics.
Oh, I was going to put it way filthier. We love comics so much. We want to get inside them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
First comes love, then comes marriage. Then you make a comic.
I love how y'all have figured out a way to touch comics, is how I'll say it.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
that's
Thank you.
awesome. I mean, I think that's, I think a lot of comics creators, because I teach at CCA and, people who are aspiring comics creators, and most of the best advice you can give to someone is like, make the comics you want to see in the world that you're not seeing. Tell the story that you want to tell. But make sure, on the other hand, it's too, like one of the other things that you have to tell people is think about your readers too. Make it easy for them to read and understand what you're doing. It's a journey. I think when you start becoming a creator or a co-creator or someone on the publishing side versus just on the consumer side, you get a new appreciation for what goes into this. And I'm sure you're going through that now.
yeah, it's exciting.
Really dipped a toe,
exciting.
and we could not be congratulating ourselves more. It's really gross of us.
Christopher, Deb, thank you so much for hanging out this evening to talk Search and Destroy and everything that you're doing at Mangasplaining. It's been a pleasure for us.
And we got to say big congratulations. Like, amazing.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. I'm looking
That's
forward
really
to seeing
kind.
you guys at Comic-Con, eh?
Yeah.
Do you mind if actually, speaking of Comic-Con, do you mind if I give a few shout outs? That's what we do
Please,
in Mangasplaining.
yes.
So Search and Destroy actually drops during Comic-Con. So it'll be available at the Fantagraphics booth, but it'll also be available at your local comic book store that same week if everything goes according to plan. So Search and Destroy Volume 1 by Atsushi Kaneko from Fantagraphics is coming out. And then our next book, Gigatown, we just found out there are going to be advanced copies of it at the Udon booth, which is in the very first row. I think it's like booth number 500 or booth number 100 or something crazy low like that on the other side of the convention center. So if you want to go get one before it comes out in October, it's by Fumio Kono, and it's amazing. Please check that out. And Mangasplaining, we've recorded the first 7 episodes already of season 5. We're just waiting until not both, all 4 of us aren't literally drowning some days in work to get back on a schedule and start pitching it again. So if you've been missing the podcast, we're still working on it. Please don't worry, and we'll have new episodes soon.
I also want to give a shout out to another book that's debuting at Comic-Con, which is the manga biography of Charles Schulz. That'll be at the Schulz Snoopy booth at Comic-Con. It's an amazing manga graphic novel biography of Charles Schulz, the creator of Snoopy. And it is done in cooperation with the Schulz estate. So there's lots of great photos and historical information, as well as just a wonderful story about someone who just made such an impact in the world with his wonderful comics.
That one's actually at Udon as well, and that'll be sold right alongside Gigatown. And we never do this, but I will say that was one of the books that Deb and I talked and were like, we've got to do this. This is a perfect Mangasplaining book. Oh my goodness, Charles Schulz in manga form. Everyone's going to love this. We're going to do this. It's going to be great. And then Udon's like, yo, I put the order. Eric at Udon was like, I put the offer in on Charles Schulz. Do you know about that one? I'm like, yeah, Yeah, I do.
No,
Anyway, we're still helping out.
Christopher does an amazing Eric Coe impersonation.
Oh, yeah?
Maybe one beer in. Yeah, yeah. Eric has a very distinct way of talking that when you meet him, please go to the udon booth and meet him in San Diego if you can.
We will.
But
We'll
he has
definitely
a
be there.
resonant voice, let's say. So you'll totally know it's him when the moment he opens his mouth.
You'll also want to drop by because Kenichi Sonoda, the creator of Gunsmith Cats, is going to be their guest at the udon booth, and I have a drawing from him from Emerald City Comic Con a couple years ago. He's amazing. He's so fast and so good. There's going to be I think Riding Bean is going to come up again in anime, so he's going to have his little renaissance, let's say.
Well, actually, if you're going to the udon booth, are you guys Pokemon fans or not?
No, our family is, but not us necessarily.
We were too late.
Oh, I'm sorry, because Hitoshi Ariga, who's a Mega Man mangaka, but also one of the designers of Pokemon XY.
Mega Man,
so he designed Mega Man stuff in the udon booth, but he's actually a Pokemon designer, and that's kind of a big deal these days. So he's going to be at the udon booth as well. You could go get a sketch from him, which would be pretty fun.
Rad. Well, we'll definitely hit it up. I'm sure we'll run into a bunch of listeners at Comic-Con, and we'll have links in the show notes to everything you just talked about. So click those links, listeners. Thank you once again, and we will release you into the world now.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a delightful conversation.
Wasn't that the best?
Yeah.
Don't you just love when you're in a conversation and you get it, your eye catches that time and you're like, oh no, I have overstayed my welcome, and yet they are still talking to me.
And Lisa's like, we should be wrapping this up, but no, we got to keep going. I have questions. They're on this sheet.
It's
I'm going
very
to
hard
ask you.
when you're holding something that you put on a table.
We also did this conversation late at night. Normally we record in the afternoon or early morning. This was after 8 p.m. and Brad and Lisa don't do well after 8 p.m.
We get a little bit punchy, but I think it's still a great chat. We're a little loosey-goosey, but it's great.
Yeah, no.
I think it was so generous for Christopher to go like, well, you know, you guys are also in comics because you're and for him to point to us having one 7-page story
which doesn't even exist yet,
which we have just written a script. Like nothing has happened. Like the fact that he would so generously point to our small potatoes is just like so sweet.
It's very sweet. It's very sweet. But you know, again, like the way that you react to people talking about us now as comics writers, which does sound ridiculous. I agree, but you react like, no, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Don't look at me. And I'm like, yes, we are comics writers. We're professional comics writers. Not until the thing gets published. And hopefully, like, I really do have hopes and dreams of making more comics with you, Lisa. And we have talked about this week a new script idea for a 1-page comic.
Hell yeah. That'll make an 8 pages total career.
But I love that we're bringing this energy to San Diego Comic-Con. Again, please look at the show notes, click on all the Mangasplaining links, but also take a look at our tips and tricks article on the Comic Book Couples Counseling website. It's incredible that people like Jedzia Axelrod and Daniel Warren Johnson and Gail Simone and David Harper and Heidi McDonald and Pornsack Pishashot and Jesse Lonigan and all these amazing talents contributed their time for free to add to that article. And I think it is a fun article. And even if you're not going to San Diego Comic-Con, those tips and tricks that you can find within it can be applied to Heroes Con and Baltimore and New York Comic-Con. So take a look at that as well. Next week, Lisa, is San Diego Comic-Con. And we will be there, and we will be there doing interviews. And we've already locked down several really rad conversations. And I know that you really hate talking about episodes
not
that
until it's
haven't
in the can.
been recorded yet. But our next episode, the one immediately following this one, is supposed to be a conversation with Gail Simone about her Misty special that's being published over at 2000 AD. And this anthology is so good. I know everyone's like crazy excited about the Uncanny X-Men. So are we.
So are
Gail
we,
Simone's
yes.
going to kill it on Uncanny X-Men.
There's
But
going to be kissing, she says.
there's going to be lots of kissing. Rogan Gambit, hello. But this book, Misty, is very much a comic book couples counseling book with a supernatural twist.
I'm excited. I'm glad we have it on the record that I am uncomfortable sharing that information.
So I won't tell you the other epic comic book creator that we have already lined up to have a chat with in San Diego Comic-Con. We'll tell you about that one next week when you're listening to our Gail Simone
Boundaries
episode.
are meant to be teased.
The other thing we need to talk about is at San Diego Comic-Con this Friday at 10 a.m. in room 4. We will be moderating the Maria Bamford and Scott Marvel Cassidy panel all about Hog Book and Laser Eyes.
I know, right?
That's
it's really,
nuts.
really cool.
Thank you, Fantagraphics, for reaching out to us and asking us, hey, would you guys like to moderate Maria and Scott's panel? And we were like, oh, what? Are you being real? Are you trolling us? Are we being punked?
The book is so good. It's so beautiful. And they are just wonderful people. You're going to want to be there to listen to them. And then you can give us a high five too after.
Yeah, and I'll include in this show notes here our episode with Maria and Scott all about Hog Book and Laser Eyes.
Yes.
So give that a listen as
and then
well.
If you're like myself, you can screen cap where they say popular podcasters Brad and Lisa Gullickson, and I'm going to send mine to my mom.
That's a pull quote.
Oh, yeah.
I'm putting that in the press
Popular
notes.
podcasters.
We're popular podcasters. The other thing we got going on in August, mark your calendars, August 18th, which also happens to be my birthday. We will be screening Atomic Blonde as part of our comic book film club at the Alamo Draft House in Winchester, Virginia. 4 o'clock, co-sponsored by Four Color Fantasies, the raddest Eisner-nominated comic book shop in Winchester, Virginia.
And in that film's honor, I'm going to get bangs.
Oh.
That might just be the stress talking.
I was like, what? You're going to get banged? What?
No, bangs.
Oh, bangs.
Like
bangs.
the fringe across your face.
I like it.
She's got really cool bangs.
Yeah, I love this movie so much. It's a perfect birthday movie for Brad. I almost said a perfect boob movie for Brad.
Yay,
and it's that
which every boob lover should have on their birthday.
It's true.
If you love boobs on your birthday. Okay, Brad, can we actually wrap this up? I am like 80% sure that our Roomba is using my nipples right now. And that's rude. Those are mine. Where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
Oh my gosh, we got to go get that Roomba. You can find me on most social medias at MouthDork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and show posters, send them to Karen Chepp at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I'm always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, or whatever app you choose. We're everywhere. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
But no nipple content. That's on our OnlyFans.
Or our main feed if you're a Roombot. A Roombot?
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on all the socials at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us a gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review of the show while you're there?
Yes, please.
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy bum 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 ba.
I don't have anything on deck.
Well, I thought you said you were ready.
Oh, I said I was ready to continue podcasting, but I had nothing on deck to say.
Well, it's your turn to say stuff. Okay, I'm going to hit off then.
Okay.